Hello everyone, welcome to Effects PhD, the craft of grading 2. I'm your instructor, Mike Matusik, and this is class 10. Class 10 this week is going to be a review and critique of the submissions for the second challenge, which is this clip that you're seeing scrolling by right now. This is kind of the raw. It actually came in as kind of an anamorphic log, and you're just looking at a linearized version of that without any color correction on it. So we had 4 submissions this time, submitted in time for me to be able to review for the actual class here. If you would still like me to comment on your take on the color correction of this piece, feel free to submit it and post it in the forums. I'd be happy to take a look. Appreciate everybody for submitting these pieces. I know everybody's busy with their day jobs, and but we appreciate doing it for this class because I think people really like to hear the comments that I have on the stuff here. So part of the challenge this time was, instead of doing 2 passes, I just asked to do 1 pass, but I also asked to put a little text file together of you selling your color correction to the client. So before I play each person's take, I'll just read their little cell that they wrote to me. So our first up here, first on deck, is Sixth Sense, aka Pete, and he writes, I'll just let his loop while I read his little cell here. With this scene, I saw a cold room. Since the first object seemed like a piece of flesh, I figured the smoke rising off of it was from a cold environment or just being unpacked from dry ice. The rim light on her arms seemed to come from the floor, so I kept the light a bit warm on the back wall, but ramped up to a cooler dark light overhead. I'd also like to tell the client I've only given this look a few hours so far, so it's not completely refined, and I'm ready to take it further if they want. So cool. That's good. You I think explained your look and your interpretation well. I think the big thing with selling to the client obviously is a confidence and a knowledge of their footage, and kind of letting them know you have a passion for your idea is always good. And when you sell your thoughts, it's going to be a lot easier for the client to kind of go with it. So the only thing I would say is never necessarily undermine what you did by saying, oh, I only spent a little time on it. Just kind of just say, this is what I did, and try to just talk up what you did, and then just let them look at it and react to it. That's usually the saying the least is probably the best. But anyway, so we'll take a look here. So the first shot, I really like the kind of mood that's set there, kind of the cooler take I like. The thing I would look at here is I could see some of your secondary on this. I don't know if this is like an octopus tentacle or something here, but I can see a little bit of that warmth kind of spilling off. So just watch that track there. I like this look. I agree. This background, me personally, I'm not a huge fan of the way that backlight of the yellow is kind of distracting. So I think cooling it off, it really pops her out, and I think that's a really nice take on that. It gets a kind of a overall or blue dress, blue background. It looks very well art directed with that color correction interpretation. I think this looks great. I love the kind of the diffused kind of highlights, and going for more of a steely kind of clean look. That looks really nice. And again, there's a lot of out of focus highlights and flary stuff going on, so sometimes when you don't crunch the blacks as much, it still looks really nice. The only question I would have here, and I'm not sure if it was purposeful or not, but the first time this medium shot comes up, the background's pretty blue, and then the next time it looks like a different correction. So I don't know if that was intended or not, but there's some interesting things going on in this particular shot and also in this shot. So I would just say, just watch the continuity there. But you know, that actually looks pretty cool too. So just something to look for there. And then this last shot, again, I can kind of feel the secondary, I don't know if that's the flesh tone isolation there, but just the, you can kind of see it going down her face there. So just either have that, if that was a shape that you drew on her face, make sure to feather that out, or if it's some type of key, to blur the edges on that, just to make it feel more natural. Because it's okay if her key light is a little different color temperature than her fill, if there is a fill, but just make sure that transition is softened. But anyway, overall, I like the cooler approach. I'm a fan of the cooler look anyway, and generally, so I think that's a nice approach. And there's some nice things on there. Just watch the secondaries and how making sure it feels believable and not kind of the magician's trick isn't figured out by seeing the edge of a key or whatnot. So cool. Good job there. Next up is Phoenix. I'll let his loop through while I read his sales pitch on this look here. He says, I went for a high contrast, moody look to communicate a sense of urgency and the organic nature of the creature that is being acted upon. The greenish tint adds to the uneasiness of the act and at the same time brings out interesting emerald undertones. The last shot was heavily vignetted to focus the viewer more on the feelings of the main character. So, cool. So yeah, I think I like this just because that's the last sentence I read. But yeah, the vignetting there I think works really well. Really on the raw image. And there's a little bit of, you'll notice when I A/B from the original footage I believe was 25 frames a second. Some of the footage I got the colored footage back at 24 in different resolutions, so there may have been a frame rate conversion there, so you're just seeing a little discrepancy, but I think you get the idea of the before and after. But anyway, I do like the vignetting. I think that's great effect to pull your eye in. Let me jump back to the beginning here. High contrast, moody, I think is it's a good call, and I also like the green tinge. It has that kind of creepy, again, sci-fi kind of vibe going on. Yeah, I think overall very consistent. You know, I think has nice contrast, has nice tone. Nothing's muddied up. It has plenty of mid-tone. It colors look balanced. Everything matches. So it looks good. You know, and again, like I said, it's like if you just kind of show a client, here you go, take a look, but you don't kind of give them any kind of description of what you did. It's easier for them to say something they don't like about it or whatnot. But if you really say, hey, I did this, I did that, this is pretty cool, I like the way, you know, when you're more passionate, excited about it, it goes a long way to getting the client on board with your look. So again, going a little more greeny, yellowy green gives it that kind of, again, as Phoenix says, the uneasiness of what's going on there. So I think that works. And I don't see, I'm taking one more look through to see if I see anything as far as windows or secondaries, but no, it looks good. So good job, Phoenix, on that. Next up is Peppo. I will loop his while I read his explanation here. He writes like a letter basically to the client here. And so it says, Dear client, I have graded your sequence and I would like to comment on some of the things I did. My first impression of the footage was that it looked kind of video or digital, so I started looking for ways to make it a bit more filmic. I therefore changed the color palette a little. One of the things that stood out to me was the girl's blue dress. I suppressed that blue a little to make it more balanced with the other elements in the picture. I also took care of some separation between the actress and the background by reducing some saturation in the background while making her skin pop a little more. After these changes, I also decided to change the color of the fluid in the bottle on the right from blue to green. I think this results in a more color contrasty image. There were a lot of blue things in the image. Of course, any of these things changed can be discussed and if necessary altered, so please feel free to give me any kind of feedback. So, very, very thorough explanation there. Again, it's a small thing when you're selling a look, but you never have to undermine yourself with saying any of these changes can be discussed, kind of, you know. So just go with it, you know. Be more, you know, say here it is. I think it looks great. And again, that goes a long way with the client jumping on board. But let's see. Cool. So one of the things that Peppo mentioned was he suppressed a little bit of the warmth in the background and took the blue dress down a little bit and brought out some color in her face. And you can see that before and after. That's what he did. And I think that's a good call. Again, that yellow in the background is a little distracting to me as well. And so I think that helps draw your eye to her. And then to me, the original contrast curve of it was a little harsh, which lends to Peppo's comment of it looked more video, which we talked about a little bit in class 9 about video look versus filmic look. I would say this might be maybe it's a little too up, but I think that curve feels a little more filmic, a little creamier, kind of fall off in the whites versus here it feels a little harder, especially around her face in the middle there. But play through it again. You know, the only thing I would say is this, and it's tricky because I don't know exactly in the edit where that exactly is, but there's kind of a disconnect between this shot because it's kind of misty, steam, foggy to here. So, and this feels pretty bright, so maybe this could be a skosh brighter. That's other than that, I mean, this shot might be a skosh bright relative to that wide shot, but you know, this changing colors of set decorated things. I like the concept, the idea behind it, again, because you sold it to me. You told me what your thought process was of doing that. That's cool. Just when you're doing something like that, just be careful that wasn't purposely placed there for some reason, and you just change some story concept in the film. So just whenever you're going to do some type of effecty type thing where you're changing the color of something in the art direction or set, just make sure to run that by the client. But no, that's cool. I like how you softened her skin up a little bit. You can see in the original she had a little more texture in her skin, and you softened it up, and I think that's a good call. And you took down some of that green yellow in the background, which is nice. So, but you know, overall, again, I don't know exactly in the context of this octopus, squid, tentacle thing, whatever it is, if it's in the room with her or whatnot. I assume it is, but if you kind of take this compared to the last shot, do they feel like they're in the same place? So I would say maybe this would have to be a little brighter if that's the case. But other than that, no, good take and explanation, very thorough. Cool. So our last submission here is from Ralph, and he did 2 versions, and I will loop his first attempt here and read his thoughts. I want to sell it as a sci-fi look, bleach bypass with a blue look. I made the look cool because the room has to be cold. She is researching some very interesting, still unknown objects. You don't do this in a room where the room temperature is high. The look is blue monochromatic while preserving normal skin tones as a reference. I also gave a second version with a bit more contrast, more blue, and blooming effect. This is to show the client whether they want more of a heavy or less heavy look. In the Da Vinci tree, I can show my client that the combination of node 2 and 3, we can easily tune the color hue to their taste. So Ralph makes a good point. It's kind of like, you know, taking the concept of our last challenge and applying it to this, where he basically giving the client two options. And so that's always a great thing. Clients love options, and they really appreciate the effort, and because the client's not sitting at the controls, so obviously they need to see options to feel confident in with what they're going with is the right direction. So I agree with that. Sometimes pointing to your GUI or showing them the node tree or whatnot, depending on, like, some clients find that really cool if they're more techie, but sometimes higher creatives just want to look at the image and whether they react to it or not. Like if they're moved by how cool it looks, meaning how interesting it looks from when you A and B it. Sometimes if they see your GUI, they're a little bit more overwhelmed with how complicated it looks, and it may not help with selling the look. But if a client is really into that, then go for it. But I'll show you Ralph's node tree there. I am a Baselight user and have not been on DaVinci since the 2K days, so I'm sure it sounds like a lot of you are Resolve users out there, so I'll let you digest that you could obviously pause the QuickTime, so enjoy, and I'll comment on Ralph's first pass here. So overall, I like it's a very sci-fi kind of scene, almost like a CSI, sci-fi CSI kind of a thing. So I think it's a very appropriate look, going for that kind of Minority Report kind of vibe. I like, again, I think Ralph put a little bit of a skin. Again, my quick times are a little bit off with the frame rate thing. So again, I like the blue touch in the eyes. It's a nice complement to the odd H on her head there, but also softening the skin tones is nice. And so I like that, but just watch. It gets a little hot here, but there's obviously a flare going over her face, so I think you can live with that. She might be a little hot there, but again, are these? Oops. This is what I wanted to do. So, these live in the same world? Yeah, actually, I mean, if this is kind of on the floor by her feet, it could be pretty close. So that looks pretty good. But yeah, overall, I like the more sci-fi look, and it looks like you kind of vignetted and accentuated some of those rays of light through the kind of foggy mist there, which is cool. And I agree with you mentioned kind of trying to keep the skin tone somewhat normal to kind of balance it out to make it feel more believable, and that's a good call. And cool. I would just say that comment. I would just say is, yeah, just watch the mid-tone. Maybe this gets a little bright there in the mids, but that shot feels really nice. And again, there's just a lot of flares going on, so I can totally buy it though. You just may want to kind of A/B, kind of here to here. Obviously, there's more density in this shot, just the way it was framed there, a little bit lower. But maybe this could be a little bit darker. But that's a subtlety there. So let's go on to take two, just to compare it to everybody. So it's kind of subtle. This has a little more green in it, and this is a little bit more blue. So, but that's a great thing to show a client. Clients love options, versions. It's like there's some diffusion going on in the highlights, which is interesting. I'd say again, it might get a little hot right there. But, this is, yeah, definitely pushing the look a little further. I would just say watch your vignetting if that's what you're doing there. You can kind of feel it moving across a little bit right there. as it's tracking. You may want to just kind of tighten that shape up and feather it a little bit more. But because there's this funky flare, out of focus highlight in the foreground, you know, it could be totally sold as being natural. But that's cool. I like the softness in the highlights. Don't go too, you know, again, that's a client thing. The client is going to decide what they like the diffusion. Just be careful that you don't go too diffuse with it, because then it could start looking a little, could be a little more on the dated side if it's too diffused, pro-misty, you could say. But if this is like, say, a flashback or something, or more dreamy sequence, the alien abduction operation on the spacecraft, you could totally sell that. So it's all context, obviously, to the story. But I think for my money, I think I'd probably go with your version 2. It's a little pushed a little further, and that's very cool. This is, now that I look back at the original, it's kind of fun to look back at the original. It does feel much greener and less contrasty, but 2 solid looks. Thanks, Ralph, for the submissions above and beyond with the two versions there. But that's good. That's what we're hoping for. So thanks everybody for your submissions. And so I wasn't necessarily planning on doing my own pass on this challenge, but there was only 4 submissions this time, and I was inspired by your guys' good work on this challenge. So I thought I would do my own pass, and I really liked this first shot. Kind of made me feel like a little more, I guess, sci-fi, but horror sci-fi, because it feels kind of like Alien or something like that. So, and I felt like I guess I'm speaking to all you guys, for like, you're the client here, so I'll take my own challenge. But so I really like the horror sci-fi look of this shot, and I don't think the rest of these shots felt horror sci-fi. It felt more, how do I say it, more TV series sci-fi. So I wanted it to be more feature film horror sci-fi, if that makes sense. So I'll just play my version and see what you guys think. So I definitely went more dense, I think, than the other submissions we saw. I wanted to feel a little bit more, I wanted it to be moodier. I wanted it to be a little more, just tone-wise, I wanted it to be much darker. In regards to the background, I'm trying to remember who said they didn't like the background, but I agree. So I did the same thing in mine. That yellow background, that's the original. Sorry about the transform on this. Just save that. So the background had that kind of yellowy light highlights coming from the floor there, so I just got rid of it completely, and I actually let her skin tone go a little bit more steely, desaturated. I didn't mind that, but and I actually added some film grain to it just to give it a little something extra, a little texture, a little bit more, again, more of a film type look. And I feel like it modernized it a little bit, and just made it a little more interesting. So I'll just quickly kind of go through some of the layers here. So I'm not exactly sure what was shot on or whatever, but it did feel like it was log material. So I used my tech grade to linearize it. And, you know, right away in just my look layer is where I took I just went straight, gave it a little more of a green, cyany green, and went dense with it. I did like the fleshy kind of, it looks like, I don't even know what that, a hunk of flesh from an octopus's tentacle or something, but I did like that fleshy pink kind of color that it kind of got rid of in this. So I added a secondary isolation here, and it was kind of not the perfect isolation. I just wanted to bring a kind of a nuance of warmth, and I just kind of blurred it out and then kind of tracked it on there. And then my next layer, Did not use my curve, did not use anything in the output, and then I added grain at the end. And I'm sure every grain tool is a little different. Take my scopes off there. But what I like to do with my grain tool is there's a channel correlation option, and it tends to want to replicate color negative grain. So there's a little bit of variation in the particles of grain that has a little bit more color in them. But I just take the color correlate. This is in Baselight up to a 1, which essentially is black and white grain. I just want it to be a texture. I don't want it to introduce any kind of color variance. So other than that, I usually keep the grain pretty small. You can go up, you can go all 16 millimeter on it. Spirit transfer 16 millimeter if you go chunky grain, but I just keep it a fine texture thing. It may even get lost in some type of encode, but I just like to give it a little texture. And that's what I did with that shot. This shot was the trickiest because I really don't feel like these are necessarily in the same room together. Maybe that's on the table in front of her. I assume that's what it is. But it just seems so different that it... But anyway, so I guess that's on the table or on the floor, or it's some monster behind her about to kill her. But at least now it feels somewhat in the same world. What I did on this one, again, I just converted it to linear, desaturated, cooled it off a little bit, similar to one of the submissions, took down the blues. Here I isolated a little bit of skin tone. Originally I actually warmed her skin tone up, but I didn't really like the way that looked, so I ended up going more in that steely kind of desaturated skin tone. This layer, I actually isolated the warm tones in the background, and then with a separate layer, I tracked a garbage mask. I kind of protected those areas from the being affected. I'm looking at this right now. I see her chest is being desaturated. So I probably, if I wanted to refine this, I'd probably protect her skin there just so it didn't look all desaturated. But just noticed that. Little vignette, took down the corners. I used this curve because I felt like it was getting a little muddy, and I scooped up the middle a little bit there. I felt like there was a hot spot over her shoulder, so I just put I tracked a little bit of a shape on that background. What's going on there? I just tracked a little bit on the background. So again, kind of pulls your eye over to her a little bit. I kind of wanted to keep what I had. So instead of tweaking my look layer, I just added another look layer that kind of refined the look. I wanted to add a little more green to go to there. My output layer, again, I was further tweaking it. I pushed the whites up a little bit more. Gonna have this transform on the end of the stack, and then added my grain. And it's feeling the same, if not the same world, the same feature film there. So this shot was a little bit more, it's a little more abstract, these shots you don't necessarily need to spend as much time on. There's a lot of interesting things in there. Kind of those are before and after. So I just pretty much gave it a little contrast, a little desaturation. Her hand tended to go pretty pinky magenta. So I grabbed that, and you can see I didn't get it perfect there, so add in a little bit more. And a little extra blur on there. So just kind of normalized her skin a little bit, and let's match that up. Now this is essentially the same shot, so I pretty much copied and pasted, but just had to retract those windows on her skin tone. And then this last shot, always pick a keyframe in the sequence that you like the best. I like this shot. I wanted the rest to feel like that, so I want to make sure it's bookended to match. So in this particular scene or shot, I again logged the linear. It's kind of annoying that my transform is bypass here when I go through my layers, but hopefully you guys can still follow along. So I just desaturated, a little contrast. The background, again, I was trying to pull out that ugly yellow in the background, so I grabbed that with a D key, Baselight D key, and then I used a shape so it didn't affect her. I have a skin tone correction, which I ended up not doing too much with because I liked the desaturated skin on her. I used a shape to really pull down that left side. I used another, I felt like she was getting a little lost, a little muddy because I crunched the black so much, so I put another shape on her key side, her fill side, and opened up a little bit of detail there. Again, I used a curve just to kind of stretch up the mids a little bit because again, it was feeling a little muddy. And then I refined the look, added a little more green to kind of match our hero shot, so to speak. My last layer, the whites were a little clippy, so I just pulled those down a little bit. Probably unnecessary, but I did it anyway. And the last output layers, the way Baselight stacks work, I have my transform, which I would probably format this differently, this anamorphic footage, so I wouldn't have to do it in my actual stack, but it's just the way I set up my scene here. And then added the grain at the end. And whenever, just, this may be not may not relate to other systems, but in DaVinci, or I'm sorry, in Baselight, you want to add, if you're doing any kind of repositions or blow-ups, make sure to put that first, then add the grain, because if you add the grain before the blow-up, then you're blowing up the the grain effect, so it's going to get soft. So if you want to keep that grain nice and sharp, make sure to put that at the very end. And that's where we're at. So I think this was a lot of fun. If, like I said, if anybody wanted to do their pass, please post it in the forums, and I will be glad to take a look. All right, so that concludes class 10, and this class also concludes this term for the craft of grading 2. I had a lot of fun with you guys. I think thanks everybody for their comments in the forums and their submissions for the challenges. Thanks everybody for when there was questions in the forum, other members that jumped in to answer those questions. I appreciate that, and it was really fun to interact with all you guys from around the world, from Chicago, really around the world. It was really a trip to see all the different people that responded in the forums and seeing what country you guys are from and stuff. It's really cool for me to experience, and for someone that's in a dark room every day, color correcting, it was fun for me to do something a little different and to hear your guys' reactions and feedback. So thank you for that. And if there's any questions about any kind of color topic, please post in the forums, and I will take a look and get back to you. And I appreciate everything, guys. And thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you. Thanks.